Testing. 1, 2, 3, baby. Testing. Had to get my audio right, but I'm still here. What's going on, folks? It's you know who back again. Another edition of Boxing History Every Night. We're here. Appreciate everyone being here. You're most certainly welcomed at all times. At all times. You see the headline, you see the title. Salute to my man, Rasclot 222. What's going on with your brother? All good out here. All good. Appreciate having you here. Thanks for dropping by last night as well on the one stream. One stream with Random Acoustic Thoughts. It was a good one. Had a good discussion on Sam Langford versus Dixie Kid, which took place in 1909, but it was on September 28th. Of course, today, September 29th, Random did another one, Sam Langford versus someone today that took place on this day in 1905. Don't recall who, but all good. Salute to my man, Skywalker Boxing, TWT representing. What's going on with your battle, brother? Hooah in this thing. Represent. Shout out to all the veterans out there holding it down, all the active duty, etc. Active, reserved, you name it. Public service workers. We're on a furlough Friday, baby. But the show goes on. Rocking with everyone. Be sure to check out Skywalker Boxing. Just put it in the search box there on YouTube. Give us a like and subscribe. Give Skywalker Boxing a like and subscribe. Doing a lot of good stuff over there. Good content. Helping promote the upcoming fight between Vince Paris and Kai Ishizawa in Japan on a John Riel Casemiro versus Oguni pay-per-view, actually, but a reasonable pay-per-view. Reasonable in all regards on Fight TV, all that stuff. But check out Skywalker Boxing's channel if you want to check it out. For sure. Rasclot is tuned in. Salute to my man, Rodolfo Rivera Jr. Rodolfo Rivera Jr. in the mix here. Appreciate you there, Rodolfo, as always. Always good discussions going on with Rodolfo. He's one of my understudies in the sport of soccer. I teach him a lot. So appreciate you, Rodolfo. Rodolfo in the mix. Look at that. Salute to my man, Skywalker Boxing, dropping that super chat. Hey, much love right there. Got to show some love there to my man, Skywalker Boxing. Says, let's go, Vince Paris. Appreciate that video we collaborated on. Certainly there, Skywalker. More to come, buddy. More to come. Check that out on his channel. As a matter of fact, it's over there. Check it out. Hit up Skywalker's channel. You'll see the video he's mentioning. It's a short. It features Vince Paris. It's very good. Very good. So, Skywalker, big ups. Big ups to Skywalker there. Much salute for sure. Much salute. Rodolfo Rivera Jr. said, what date did the Paris fight again? Rodolfo, it's on October 12th. October 12th. So it's going to be early. Certainly here on the East Coast. A little less early on your end, but early nonetheless. Or at least late for you, early for us East Coasters. East Coasters going in is pretty dope. But yeah, we're going to be in the mix to check it out. Skywalker sends his regard. I'll post that short. That was customized specifically for you, Skywalker there. I'm going to post one on my channel as well. And there'll be more. There'll be more for sure. Keeping that thing going. I got you for sure. And I'm going to do some repost and all that stuff. Rodolfo, okay, yeah, I got Casemiro card now. Remember? Certainly there, Rodolfo. Yeah, it should be a good one. Good interesting one. It's one where it's reasonable, so it's worthwhile. Certainly worthwhile. There goes a video link to Skywalker's video there. Skywalker Boxing dropped that link in the chat. A little promo for Vince Paris. Be sure to check that out, folks. It's a good one. I think you'll I think you'll enjoy it. Just showing some love to Vince there, holding it down from General Santos City. Same place as Manny Pacquiao. That's a name you've probably heard of, right? Manny Pacquiao, Emmanuel. So, major salutes there. Salute to my man, Random Acoustic Thought says, big up 86 plus chat. Good stuff there, Random. I appreciate you being here. Appreciate you dropping by, checking in. Hey, good chat last night. Very good boxing discussion. We went in on the great Sam Langford, etc. But folks, of course, we're here tonight for a very interesting discussion. It's going to be on one of the all-time greats. No question about it. Any way you slice it, one of the all-time greats. And that is one gentleman, Jim. Know him as Gentleman Jim. James J. Corbett, former world heavyweight champion in the sport of boxing. As a matter of fact, the second ever world heavyweight champion. The gentleman himself, Jim, a.k.a. James J. Corbett. The name stands out. Of course, if you follow boxing, you know there have been a number of Corbett's, but they all, at least those that made a name in their sport, some who didn't, took their namesake from the original James J. Corbett, as mentioned, the second ever world heavyweight champion. And that's what we're going to be discussing tonight. It should be a good one because, hey, he was able to do some things in the sport. You know the name, certainly know the name. Salute to my man, Poland Ball 69. Appreciate you dropping in here, Poland Ball, as always. I know you know a thing or two about Gentleman Jim. So it's going to be beautiful. It's going to be beautiful. Shout out to the Boz, of course. The Boz in here. Appreciate the Boz. Check us out on Boxing Chit Sundays. It goes down 2 p.m. Eastern typically. Yeah, we love it. We love it, baby. We love it. The Boz says, sends its regard to the rest of them in the chat. No big ups and salutes for sure. Poland Ball says definitely one of the most controversial figures in boxing history. That he most certainly was. James J. Corbett was not without controversy while fighting, even after fighting. Not without controversy. Certainly, when you think about the sweet science aspect, he's someone that is often noted, rightly so. Certainly a scientific boxer. So when you think sweet science and Jim Corbett, that's right. It's meant to be. It's worthwhile. And he is one of the best to have laced him up with a short career, really. Short career in terms of years and short career in terms of total fights. But he made the most of it as far as reaching the pinnacle or hitting that top echelon in a short career. I mean, he's one of the good examples, certainly. And hey, he went on to have a career after the career in boxing, movies, etc. So he's a guy who got around. Shout out to Joshua Woods. What's going on, fellow Joshua? Says, got the sensor bars ready. Good stuff. Good stuff. Good stuff there. Good stuff there, Joshua Woods. Appreciate you, Joshua Woods. Knows this stuff. Always in here, dropping some good stuff. Salute to my man, Alexander Campbell. Hey, welcome, Alex. Been a minute, buddy. Good to see you here, Alex. Holding it down. Major salute there, as always. Big ups to Alex, folks. Hey, yeah, be sure to hit that like button. Be sure to check these folks out. Check out the Boz. Check out everyone on here dropping some stuff. Check out this channel. It's called Filthy Boxing Hustler. Check that one out. It's a good one. Old school content. The Boz says Gentleman Jim was something else. Certainly he was. He was certainly something else. There, Boz. He was an interesting character for sure. Interesting character. That's no question there. Brian Corbett. Hey, salute to you, Brian Corbett. We got another Corbett in the building right there. Says Peace 86. Hey, peace to you. Corbett. Brian Corbett. So we have the original Gentleman James J. And then we have Brian who dropped in representing. I mean, we're talking about one Corbett. Why not have another in the mix? It's meant to be, baby. It's meant to be. What controversy, Poland? Are you stirring stuff up again? The Vaz. Hey, Gentleman Jim is full of controversy there, Vaz. Full of it. Full of it. Brian Corbett. Hey, always. Hey, appreciate you being here. I don't know if maybe the first time. Either way, certainly welcome. Salute to you, Brian Corbett. Man, pleasure having you here. TWT represent. So came over from Skywalker. Salute to Skywalker once again, doing his thing. Pulling Ball says Corbett was certainly one who didn't mind twisting the facts to make a good story, especially when it came to his technical abilities. Corbett tried to claim he invented the left hook, among others. Hey, yeah, Corbett, interesting dude. Interesting dude, most certainly. He was one of those guys who was very much interesting when it came to the facts and just in general, his dealings in the sport as well. Some of the agreements he may have made to rematch guys like Peter Jackson, etc. James J. Corbett. He's just one of those interesting characters there. So you are correct there, Poland Ball. Sullivan called him out when Corbett tried making those claims and said the moves like the left hook had been around for a long time. Most certainly, a left hook wasn't just invented right then and there. Certainly wasn't invented by Corbett. Not that he couldn't throw one, but certainly he wasn't the inventor of such. Move this. He wasn't the inventor of such. He was one of those guys who certainly could throw the punches. Invent them? I don't know. So that's one of the misconceptions also. Many think that Corbett was the first scientific boxer. Not true. Not true. He was not the first scientific boxer. The notion of knowing how to box and throw the right punches and having a certain type of pedigree in the sport did not start with James J. Corbett. As a matter of fact, he was one of many who have come through during that period who just so happened to be one who could box. And for him, he's one who we have film of. And I would argue a good deal of film considering when he started. 1886 is when he started the sport. So oftentimes a lot of those guys from that era, we don't have any film of them. And Corbett, fortunately, we do have film of him. So you get to see him applying his trade. So certainly easier to associate the sweet science aspect to a guy like Corbett and the origins of such to a guy like Corbett, because he was pretty much right there in the beginning as far as actual films were concerned. And I've said this story on one of the previous broadcasts or whatever you want to call it. The Black Mariah, Thomas Edison, that was his creation. The first sort of, well, not the absolute first, but that film of Corbett was Corbett versus Peter Courtney. That was the first championship, or no, not championship. That's the first, what do you call it? Yeah, I guess you could say it was a championship boxing matchup on film or something like that. Matchup or whatever you want to call it. Maybe it wasn't necessarily, it didn't have the legitimacy of some of those we're accustomed to, but it was one of the first major films, I guess you can say, from the sport of boxing. And it was legitimate. And Corbett was the champion at the time. And this kind of changed the game, set forth what would have been, or what would become, World Heavyweight Championship boxing being a marquee thing in the sport. Now, that was supposed to be John L. Sullivan. Thomas Edison, everybody knows Thomas Edison. He wanted John L. Sullivan. Of course, we don't have any film of John L. Sullivan in his prime or anything of that nature, though fortunately we have film of him at an older age. Of course, not the John L. Sullivan you see with the handlebar mustache or fancy little curled up mustache. What do you call that? And we call it old school, but it's the Sullivan, essentially. Certainly not him, but we do have film of him. But Corbett, we did get to see him right smack dab in, I guess what you can say was his prime, even though he wasn't very active, and it's on film. So that's a pretty beautiful thing from an overall perspective. So this is good stuff. Got Alex in here. We got Random in here. Boz says I'm having some thigh issues myself. Hey, get that right. Get that right, Boz. Pulling ball, not sure. Discussing Corbett's leverage is stirring stood up, but Corbett is definitely what I call controversial. Certainly. Yeah, not stirring. Hey, that's a great point right there. Him training Jeffries just out of spite of Johnson's race is one example. Certainly. Yeah, Johnson said that Corbett was pretty nasty there, ringside, etc. He is not pretty nasty there ringside. He is not. Social respect. No, he is controversial there, Boz. He is very controversial. Not my first time. Okay, Brian. Cool. Good stuff. Good stuff there, Brian. Well, my fault there. You go too deep into this, Poland. No, hey, Boz, no. Poland is right. He's a controversial dude. He is very controversial. Most certainly. Here's some of Jack Johnson's quotes on him. He's controversial for sure there, Boz. May not seem like it on the surface, but he's a controversial figure. Former world heavyweight champion, so big props to that, of course. But that's not where it ends there. That's not where it ends. I'm sure the left hooker was around during the caveman day. Yeah, you had to figure it out at some point. Salute, Max Duran. Appreciate you being in here, buddy. Appreciate you being in here. As always, Max back in the mix. Good stuff. Salute to you, Max there. But I didn't know Corbett was the only guy to beat Sullivan. Yeah, only guy to beat Sullivan. Knocked him out 1892, September, I believe, to pick up the World Heavyweight Championship. Now, Sullivan, you could argue at that particular time, was not the Sullivan of old. Certainly not the Sullivan of prime. And dare I say that another version of Sullivan would have reversed that and knocked out Corbett? I think so. But hey, that's just me. That's just my opinion. Poland Ball says Sullivan and Jeffries, two of my favorite fighters, were also controversial for the same reason. It's not bad to discuss controversy. Certainly, they were. I mentioned some of such in the video on Diverhead Martin, who's someone that James J. Jeffries was going to fight at one point, and ultimately it didn't happen. Along with that Johnson fight at the time that it should have happened, but at the end of the day, very interesting. Rasclot had to laugh at that as well. Corbett said he invented the left hook. Hey, that is worth a chuckle there. That is worth a chuckle there, Rasclot. I give it to mostly Mendoza, says Joshua Woods. Daniel Mendoza. Now, yeah, he goes way back there to the early days, bare knuckle days. Another example of one of those smaller guys who, you know, from a weight perspective, it was all relative. So he was a heavyweight, you can say, and he fought bigger men, and he was able to put a licking on those men because of the fact that he showed that he had a level of skill that they weren't accustomed to dealing with. I don't know a ton about Daniel Mendoza, except for the fact that he was one of the best during his era there in the bare knuckle era, and he backed that up by taking on and beating some of the other guys who were considered the best in and around that time. So, bare knuckle world champion there, Mendoza. Alexander Kenneth says, Corbett was a great fighter in his time, brought up defensive boxing a whole rung up the ladder. Certainly, he was one of those guys to do so. He was one of those guys to do so for sure. He did steward, I guess you can say in some sense, that defensive style of boxing. I mean, he worked behind the jab. He paid attention from a footwork perspective, made sure he was at the right distance, made sure he had his timing down. And he too wasn't a huge guy, stood about 6'1". But that being said, he was more of a slender type of fellow, 6 foot, 6'1", somewhere in that range, 6'1"-ish. So slender guy who, hey, he could put his punches together very well. very well. And as we know, that took him a long way in the sport in itself. As a matter of fact, let me bring this up here. Let me bring this up. We have Corbett. Just want to show this. Give a little glimpse into Corbett himself, the man who is Gentleman Jim. Gentleman Jim. Check that out. 11 wins, 4 losses, 3 draws, 5 victories via knockout. 11 wins. Hold on, let me pull that back up. I was supposed to loop, actually. That was supposed to loop. But yeah, 11 wins, 4 draws, 5 via knockout. Or 11 wins, 4 losses, 3 draws, 5 via knockout. And he also had 2 no contests. San Francisco, California, of course. I'm going to hit up a man, Random Acoustic Thoughts here. Random Acoustic Thoughts. Want to talk some Corbett? But yeah, San Francisco, California. I've mentioned this before. San Francisco, California was kind of a hotbed for boxing in general. You think about it out there on the West Coast. I mean, we know Cali as being a boxing town or a boxing state rather, but San Francisco and the Bay Area in general was a boxing area. San Francisco, boxing city, town, and boxing was big time there, and they were serious about it as well. Reading some of these articles, sometimes they didn't play. Hey, and some there in San Francisco didn't like Corbett. Some in San Francisco, his hometown, didn't like him. You know, for varying reasons, of course. For varying reasons. Some of that to do with him not fighting certain fighters, so on and so forth. And some of it to do with other stuff. Hey, we got to talk about it there, Boz. It's a part of that time, so it's got to be in the mix there. We're talking about the past time, my friend. So, hey, it has to be in the mix. It's very much a part of it there. We got to talk about it there, Boz. We don't have to talk about it here in modern times if we choose, of course. But as far as recollecting on those times, it's got to be a part of it. Max Duran says, who do you have in Canelo Charlo tomorrow? And what do you think about Fury versus Usyk being announced? Also, Fury was just messing around. And I guess he is about making that fight. As far as he was saying some stuff, I was like, man, he was going in on Usyk. Didn't seem like the fight was going to happen, but it's going to happen. So big time for the heavyweight division. Of course, we'll see what happens with Fury and Ngannou, though it should be Fury. But big time for the world heavyweight, or for the heavyweight division. We can finally have an undisputed world heavyweight champion in the aftermath of said matchup, which would be the first in the 4-belt era. So very much looking forward to that aspect of it. Sullivan fan. Hey, I'm a fan of Sullivan. I'm a fan of Sullivan myself there. But for sure. The claim that Corbett invented the hook was with one of his hook in one of his fights with Chowinski. Interesting there. Interesting. Of course, their first fight was stopped by the police. They fought very early in their careers. I believe Corbett was about 4-0 and Chowinski was about 3-0, somewhere around there, or could have been inversed the other way around. But you get it. They were very early in their career when they fought, or at least hopped in the ring the first time in what was eventually broken up and stopped by the police. But both of them from San Francisco, California. You know, I was saying San Francisco, it was a hotbed. It was one of those places where a lot of good boxing took place. And you can learn a great deal as far as the amateur side as well. They had athletic clubs, of course, but at that particular time, athletic clubs were all over the place because of the fact that boxing was the number one sport at that particular time. And on some nights, it still is, but certainly not like back then. But on some nights, it still is. Yeah, Poland Corbett fan too. Probably my favorite era to read about. Certainly, hey, same here. Yeah. Hey, fan of both there. I'm with you there, Polar Ball. I know you're a fan of both. The bod says Errol Flynn didn't look at all like Gentleman Jim. actually, I watched that film. That was one of the more recent films I watched. I don't watch a ton of films these days, making videos and all that stuff, but one of the more recent ones I watched was that Errol Flynn movie with Gentleman Jim Corbett. And it was a great one right there. I enjoyed it. It was I thought it was pretty spot on in some areas, especially when I saw them recalling some of the fights. I wish they would have had that Peter Jackson fight, but considering it was 1942, they were like, yeah, we're not gonna show that one, but that would have been pretty epic to have it on film as far as a reenactment or whatever it may be. But certainly it was pretty cool because I saw it recently, as mentioned, and having looked into Jim Corbett, it brought a smile to my face seeing some of the actual fights being recalled and presented in the fashion that I had read up on in some cases. So very interesting movie, very good movie. And real quick, hey, I'm gonna bring in my man Random Acoustic Thoughts, who is going to join us for a portion of discussion or of this discussion as we talk about Gentleman Jim Corbett, a man who was a former world heavyweight champion and shared the ring with a lot of top-notch fighters, certainly, and we could have had even more had he been a bit more active. So how's it going with your Random Acoustic Thoughts?
Yo, big up 86. I'm doing good, man. Just getting ready to go into work. So just stopping by briefly. I knew this was coming up. I don't have a tremendous amount to add, but thanks for having me on, brother.
Oh yeah, no problem. Yeah, it's all good. Yeah, so hey, that was a good being able to chat on the live last night, talking about guys like Sam Langford. Of course, we were talking about him and Dixie Kid, but thinking about it, these guys came to, for the most part, a little bit after Corbett's era, I guess you can say, because Corbett there on the back end was a very inactive fighter. That being said, it would have been very interesting to see how he'd match up with some of these other guys who were fighting at heavyweight once we got to the 1900s, early 1910 or early 1900s, then early 1910s. That would have been very interesting, but of course, we didn't get to see any of those. But the thought in general, Corbett, I think he would have held himself pretty well, but the power of guys like a Langford, McVeigh, etc., you would have to think would come into play at some point.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, it depends on how he match up specifically with each guy, but he wasn't tremendously large. I'm pretty sure he was heavier than Sharky in their fight, but he wasn't like overly gigantic guy. So maybe like some of the power guys like Langford with that amount of experience would be difficult for him. Maybe some of the guys, I'm not sure. I'd have to think about it a lot more. But one thing to note about Corbett is, although he didn't have a lot of pro fights, he had a lot that were scheduled and that didn't happen. But he also had like a tremendous amount of exhibitions that he did. He wasn't just sitting around for most of his career. So if you go to Cyber Boxing Zone, folks, and look at Corbett's page, I mean, it looks like he has at least a couple of hundred exhibitions, 200-300 exhibitions, maybe. It's hard for me to judge. It's an awful lot.
Yeah.
It looks like more than 200 exhibitions. It's crazy. Just his 1892 alone actually looks like about 80 or 90.
So like yeah, that's a good point you brought up there, Random. Just want to say that. Yeah, while Corbett, he didn't have a long and extensive career on the pro side as far as official fights. Certainly when it comes to factoring in those exhibitions and appearance related matters, he was all over that.
Yeah, he did an awful lot of boxing. So it's, I don't know if his exhibitions were for like theater performances or if some of them were like the challenge, like some fighters have done, stay 4 rounds for a side bet. I think it was Jack. This is later, but I'm trying to remember the guy's name. Maybe it was Jack Monroe. Did one of those, like a 4-round challenge with Jeffries, and actually knocked him down and stayed the distance as well for, I think, $250. But this is later than the time we're talking about now. But Corbett was a real technician. I'm trying to think, wasn't he like a bank clerk or something before he got into fighting?
Yes, actually he was. He was some form of a bank clerk, and he ended up parlaying that into what became a boxing career. I don't in the movie in itself that I'm talking about with Errol Flynn, they touched on that a little bit, but some of that was more so having a love interest in the actual movie. You know how they do with some of those. But yeah, he came from that type of background, a guy that you probably wouldn't have thought would have been able to get in there and mix it up in the fisticuffs, but he held himself very well.
Yeah, and looking at Cyber, it looks like he's got a couple undated uh, bouts, but I guess he became 7 silver championship cups in amateur boxing on the Pacific Coast. So it looks like he got some amateur work in as well. In 1885, it says the new Olympic club opened, and by the end of the year, he became the heavyweight champion of the club. So I'm not sure who all the boxers were in that thing, but yeah, the guy was putting in a lot of boxing, and it reflected in his performances. Not everyone who doesn't have a lot of fights that way. Like they don't know what to do. So I like what you're doing there with the graphics. There he is, slipping the left, banging the body. Go, Jim. You see, I got the baby-faced assassin. I got
Bring that back up.
Jimmy McLarnin is my avatar today. Switch it up.
Okay. Hold on. Let me see there. Jimmy McLarnin. Let me pull that right back up there. Okay, Jimmy McLarnin.
One of the guys.
Belfast assassin. Babyface assassin.
100%. One of the greats who actually got out of the game with money and lived a long life. So shout out to Jimmy McLarnin for getting the good end, the long end of the stick, however you would say it.
Someone in the comments, I just want to say Poland Ball, maybe you know, who is that guy Jim is in with that picture to the far left? I couldn't tell. But I'm sure someone in the comments knows. But yeah, just drop it in there. Drop it in there, whatever. But yeah, go ahead, Random.
Yeah, so like it's a complicated time because I think he did some exhibitions with non-pro Jack Dempsey, and I think they were scheduled to fight, but I'm not certain it happened. I don't know. Corbett's got one of those weird careers. You look through his strictly pro fight resume and you'd be like, oh, okay, yeah, high level, not many fights, some gaps in between fights, but you look at everything he was doing, he was very important to pugilism. And so that explains his outsized influence compared to his pro resume, although he had stacked those fights in there, a little bit like Jeffries. Not a lot of fights, but a lot of high-level fights relative to the whole. There are other boxers who are prominent in different times who it's the other way around. They mostly have padding with a couple of high-level fights. So he got it in. He had a respectable career, certainly. And I'm trying to remember who was it. Kilrain? Who did he beat to get the opportunity at the title?
So essentially, when it came to that, it was really, I think, the Peter Jackson fight that was ultimately the fight that was one of the major deciders as far as the overall trajectory there. So that one happened in May of 1891. Let me pull it up here. Yeah, so May 21st, 1891, as a matter of fact. Now, at that particular, so he had beat Kilrain and then McCaffrey before that. But that being said, at that particular time, Jackson was on a quest, and I mean an absolute quest to face Sullivan. And as a matter of fact, Jackson had defeated a number of people leading up to that point, and he would go on to do even more. But Sullivan or Corbett versus Jackson was a 61 rounder ultimately, and you could argue it was one of the great scientific fights in the sport because both of these guys possessed a high level of skill. And I recall reading several articles that really touched on the fact that this matchup was one of the bigger ones in the sport at that particular time. And there were people who held Jackson in high regard and viewed him as the best heavyweight in the world. And a number of people wanted to see Corbett, that is, take a loss. And of course, that fight ended up being a draw, but it wasn't without controversy. Certainly, there were those that felt that Jackson deserved the nod in that contest. I've read that. And by that same token, I've seen some stuff where articles where they favored Corbett in the nod. But that being said, from what I recall, the general consensus was that Jackson had the better billing in that contest, but ultimately it was Corbett. So that was the one that really aligned him and set him up for what ultimately became that fight at John L. Sullivan. And I think regardless, Jackson wouldn't have got that shot even had he won.
Oh, I see. And I guess what year did he win the title? I'm sorry, I'm coming on as a guest and I'm just quizzing you.
It was what was it, 1890 or 1892 when he beat Sullivan? Yeah. So yeah, 1892. September of 1892.
Oh, I
Yeah.
see. And he followed that up. He also beat Charlie Mitchell. I recognize his name. I'm pretty sure that I saw in the, I think it was the McVeigh Jeanette finish fight in Paris. They were saying it was the greatest fight in France since Sullivan fought Charlie Mitchell at Chantilly, which I think was 1888. My
That's
memory.
interesting. That's interesting. I don't doubt that you saw that. The interesting thing about that fight, from what I recall, is the fact that in that fight, Charlie Mitchell, of course, he showed at that particular time that he could be a very elusive fighter, and he was the first man to take Sullivan to a draw. But also, that fight, if I'm recalling correctly, was the first time they fought, and it was under, I guess, London prize ring rules in some capacity. I know it was done outside. It was raining and muddy, and it went a long period of time. But Charlie Mitchell, because of the London prize ring rules, the actual rules, he did a lot of avoiding of Sullivan. To include, at points he would drop down intentionally, and under London prize ring rules, that meant that was the end of the round. Go back to your corner, 30 seconds, be back ready to snap. And that's one way in which he was able to avoid Sullivan landing something to knock him out in that particular contest, because he was no question the smaller man, really more of a middleweight. He'd be in that middleweight, super middleweight range by comparisons to today, but he was accustomed to fighting bigger men, and he's kind of listed as a heavyweight for the most part. But that was an interesting aspect to it. So it went a long time, and they eventually agreed to a draw. It was an agreement. Both teams' corners, they settled on that draw because of the fact that they didn't want to extend that fight any longer.
Oh, interesting. Yeah, Mitchell gave up some size. He wasn't a particularly large guy, but like you said, quite elusive. Made a good fight of it. Apparently, the French were very impressed that particular fight. But yeah, it's an interesting time where you see guys doing exhibitions sometimes against the same guys they later fight. So there's sort of like the boxing fraternity operated on multiple levels. There was like the theater level. There was sometimes the exhibitions would be as part of a play, but sometimes the exhibitions would be a little harder or a side bet challenge, where there was something at stake. And then, and like late, I don't know about this time, but I imagine they were selling tickets to some of the exhibitions, even if they weren't a play. So guys are making money. If you're a top dude,
Yeah.
you can make money. It's not just him and his contemporaries. This was true later on, where that became its own spectacle. So it's pretty cool to see
Certainly.
all the these guys did, and in spite of all the politics, the racial politics especially, but also money games. Yeah, there was a lot going on. There were a lot of people doing a lot of stuff. So certain fighters, even if they avoid certain matchups, there were a lot of other ones. A lot of these guys did have options, and that explains some of the booking for some of the fighters who were less busy, or they were at a stage in their career when they were less busy.
Oh yeah, certainly. I wouldn't doubt it. I wouldn't doubt that was the case there for sure. Real quick, let me jump into these comments real quick. Poland Ball says he saw an article in from the 1880s for a television between Corbett and Jackson, claiming Corbett was 59-0 or 59-0-3. Not sure how true it is though. Yeah, that might have been tying in some of those exhibitions and such that Random was speaking of, in addition to, I'd imagine there were some of those private club type affairs that they were likely factoring into their Poland Ball. So that's probably where that came from, just thinking about it here, just from the general look of things. Joshua Wood says Jeff did beat Corbett and also beat Fitz as well. Most certainly, James J. Corbett, someone who is definitely worth mentioning when thinking about James J. Corbett. James J. Jeffries. You see the theme there, the trend there, James J. It was a thing in boxing back then, certainly. The bod says Jeffries was too strong for most guys back then. He was a force, well-conditioned athlete, just overall and in general, strong, had endurance. He could take a punch, no question, and he could deliver a punch late in fights. So guys like Corbett, Fitzsimmons, and others who ran into him often found that out because of the fact that they might have gotten the earlier part of the contest, but ultimately, when it came down to the attrition and what happened there on the back end, Jeffries himself remained strong and formidable. So that's what made him an overall powerhouse and dominant during the time. Max Duran says Corbett also had a legendary fight with Bob Fitzsimmons, if I'm not mistaken. Bob Fitzsimmons, certainly that's one. As a matter of fact, let me bring up the following to kind of touch into that. And Random, you can jump in there as well. Just look at this. So I was talking about from an official fight standpoint, just how this guy had ultimately a shorter career by many standards that we go by here to, or we are able to view here today, but he made the most of it in that short career. Just look at that list right there. James J. Jeffries, who we mentioned, former world heavyweight champion. John L. Sullivan, the first world heavyweight champion, the man he beat to become champion. Peter Jackson, the Black Prince, former colored world heavyweight champion, longest reigning colored world heavyweight champion to be exact. Bob Fitzsimmons, the third ever world heavyweight champion, first 3-division champion in the sport, representing, and he won the world heavyweight championship from Corbett, then went on, of course, to win the middleweight championship and he had the middleweight championship first, actually, but then the light heavyweight championship. Charlie Mitchell, this is a guy who was one of the best that doesn't often get mentioned these days. We're just talking about his contests just in general, but he was most certainly a force, and given his size, he had a punch on him, fought for the world title. Joe Chawinski, I mean, his name comes up nearly every time we do one of these lives. We know what it is with Joe Chawinski, just one of the great light heavyweights the sport has seen, world heavyweight championship challenger. Tom Sharkey, big time, of course, the fighting sailor he is. Charles Kid McCoy, former world middleweight champion. So Corbett shared the ring with him, defeated him actually. Dominic McCaffrey fought for the American heavyweight championship against John L. Sullivan. And you could argue the world heavyweight championship, but there's a little controversy and it's a lot of things surrounding that. But that being said, he fought for the American heavyweight championship against John L. Sullivan. Then Jake Kilrain, former bare knuckle champion of the world, and the man that Sullivan defeated to substantiate his claim as the world heavyweight champion. So that's pretty impressive given that Corbett is registered as, from an official standpoint, having only 20 fights. What do you think of that there, Random?
Yeah, man, that's intense. And then if you go through, if people care to browse through his the exhibitions, add the exhibitions in, because you'd have to think he was doing sparring that wasn't in public. So it wasn't like the only time he boxed was bouts or exhibitions, but he was making a lot of money that way. And but he also got in some real tough opponents there. You're talking about some key fighters of his era, and even like Kid McCoy, like now sort of the real McCoy. You know, so he's lived on in other ways, but very serious dude of his day, top guy, and that was a late career win. So I'm not sure if it was controversial or not, but yeah, man, he fought some dudes. Yeah. And that's all you can ask. But at the time, you know, this is a time when the craft, you know, the gentlemanly art, there was more than one way to make money from it. And he definitely partook of that. And He said with Fitz too, exhibitions, but then for an actual fight to a decision, he wants a big purse. There's stuff of him holding out for bigger money, turning down promoters around the country around the US that wanted to host fights. They would basically agree to, sometimes the boxers would agree to the match. Then they would basically field bids from places as to where the match would happen. So it didn't always work that way, but some of these guys operated on that level. Like it was definitely a business, but there was also a lot of pride at stake. So it gets complicated. There's a lot of pride in this sport, a lot of hyper competitive, high risk individuals. So it's not, there's often a lot of chaos. But yeah, this guy put in the hours. He definitely donated to the craft in as much as he could.
Hey, yeah, and random as Alexander, salute Alex. He mentions the record of fighters from those early days are terribly incomplete. And I always highlight the fact that Random himself actually discovered this unreported Sam Langford fight that took place, and that kind of sheds light on it. We still find stuff to this day. Can you speak on that, Random, and just kind of what that process was like? Because I recall and I appreciate the fact that you had let me know that night, and we actually went on live to discuss it.
Yeah, I'm trying to remember. I think it was February 24th, 1903. He fought 3 days later. He fought that Friday, so it was Tuesday, I think. Tuesday the 24th. He fought a guy, Young Jarvis. It was part of a smoke talk, which was, well, it served multiple functions, but on the face of it, it was like a gathering of people at almost like the athletic clubs would do, but there was more than sports. There was music and poetry readings and stuff. So anyway, in certain towns, they were doing these and having boxing as part of the attraction. This particular night, they had Greco-Roman wrestling, they had catch wrestling, catch as catch can wrestling, which includes submissions, basically, and then 3 boxing bouts. And Langford participated in one of those. And that was in the, no, I had it wrong. I've been saying it was in the Post. It was actually in the Boston Daily Globe and the Revere Journal. And that was just there. It was just there behind the paywall. It was reported in 2 major sources, 2 reliable sources. So, I hope to find more. That's finding photos that aren't out there yet, other than behind the paywall, and finding these fights is one of my missions. I found a lot of bookings for Langford, but it was false alarm fights that got switched over or canceled, or like in the case of, I saw Langford booked against Kid Jennings, and I'm like trying to tear open the file to go check. I'm like, Kid Jennings, I don't remember that, but it was Pocahontas Jennings. It's just another term they went by. I've been making note of the other monikers they went by. I'll do some newspaper searches along those lines as well. Like Jack Blackburn, one of his fights with Langford, it might have been the first one. They had him in the paper as John Blackburn. So there's the research, even when it's a dead end or when it's something that's already happened, often it opens up an avenue for further research. But I don't go as far back as this. This is old school, even compared to, these are the old timers, even compared to Langford, who didn't start until 1902.
Yeah.
But definitely an earlier class. But these guys paved the way for all the drama and all the politics. These guys paved the way and helped establish the popularity of the sport. So this is a very important gentleman right here.
Most certainly. Yeah, appreciate that, Random. Appreciate that for sure. Yeah, James J. Corbett, just one of those guys who was one of the pivotal people just in general when we think about the history and spell it out. You got to mention James Corbett because of the fact that he played such a prominent role. And I mentioned he started in 1886, so it's pretty amazing that we can go back to that time. And yeah, if you see the 86 boxing, I'm going to reveal a secret. The 86 that's a particular year tied to yours truly as far as when I was born. So he made his debut 100 years from when I was born. Just think about that. We're able to talk about him. We're able to have him on film. If you think about the strides we made from a technological standpoint just over the last 10, 12 years, it's pretty amazing to think that we actually have film of James J. Corbett. And there's a good deal of it relative to when he was born. When he was born, there's a good deal of film when you really think about it. Of course, we have him and Fitzsimmons' first World Heavyweight Championship match that was ever filmed, as also mentioned by someone was just mentioning that a little bit earlier. Was that you there, Alex? but someone mentioned it, or no, it was Joshua Woods, I think, that I had mentioned it. But yeah, the first championship fighter on film, or at least championship fight, Corbett and Fitzsimmons. So I mean, I think that speaks volumes right there. The fact that we still have some of this footage to this day, and Corbett, I mean, he was an innovator in some sense. He was an innovator in some sense there. So I think that's why, yeah, it's cool being able to discuss them. And we have a lot of good detail on them as well, a lot of great accounts. And as you know, Random, from just diving into accounts tied to fighters from that era or shortly thereafter, a lot of the writers during that period, they kept it pretty much straightforward in a lot of cases. Now, they used some, preferential language, I guess you can say, in some regards, but as it related to fighters who they felt were not seeking the best fights, fighters who they felt were taking easy routes, etc., they usually kept it pretty real about that.
Yeah, man, it was super harsh. You can find there are examples of guys who are being fluffed or convenient omissions in someone's record, either claiming fights. I had a few hard stopping moments there where I saw write-ups on other fighters and they claimed to have beaten Langford or fought Langford. But a couple of those occasions, Langford was doing something else at that time. So I was like, didn't seem very likely, but just trying to get it all in order. The bookings, cancellations, things came together so quickly. I was telling you the other day, Langford's title shot against Joe Gans, that was like reported as practically finalized a week before the fight.
Yeah.
So like, and he'd fought, I think a few days before that. So it was like, he fought 3 days later. It's in the paper. The fight's practically booked. And then a week later, he actually fights, which explains why he had trouble making 138 ringside on a week's notice.
Oh,
but,
yeah.
Seen certain writers again complain about Gans and his manager and the weight games, but there was a lot of malleability in the way weight operated in the lower weight classes. So there was some frustration, but the writers didn't hold back. So they tell you if the champion keeps fighting above the weight that contesting it above the weight, they complain about it. They're saying it about oh gosh, I can't remember who it was. Might have been one of the Corbetts, not the original, but one of the young Corbetts. I can't remember, but yeah, they were saying like he's already in the other weight class, and he's
in likelihood, young Corbett the second.
Yeah, I'm not sure, to be honest. I just can't remember. I'm distracted because I'm just a couple minutes away from work here. The joy of work.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's pretty cool. I really appreciate you having me on. I'm gonna listen to the rest while I do the thing. While I bring home the bacon. Which is
Cool. Hey, good stuff, Random. Appreciate having you on, buddy. Take care, and of course, we'll chat again.
Yeah, brother. Good looks. Take it easy, everybody.
Salute. Random Acoustic Thoughts, folks. Random Acoustic Thoughts. Real quick, shout out to my man Dan the man, sending his regards. Que pasa, amigos? Good stuff there, Dan, in the midst of a move. So, hey, appreciate you being here, Dan. That is all good stuff. Let me get to a few of these comments here real quick. The boss says we need to appreciate the great boxer. I know some like to dig deeper into their personality, but you must remember you can't judge them because you didn't live in their time. Hey, certainly. Hey, how one chooses to judge them is certainly personally up to them there, the boss. I agree with you for sure. I agree with you. But certainly we can talk about it. We can certainly talk about it. As I always say, the conditions of the time were very much different than now, though some things still apply. But yeah, those are tougher individuals dealing with tougher situations and dealings back then. Just thinking about it, especially as it relates to the sport of boxing. So, hey, but we got to talk about the personalities. That's what makes them unique in the sport. Dan says, thank you, Joshua Woods. First amigos I've ever met. Who knows Sullivan was great friends with Dixon and the only man on earth who helped Dixon. Yep, good stuff. Yeah, you mentioned that before, Dan. So Joshua Woods mentioned that Sullivan was close friends with George Dixon, and Dixon would tell doctors he had no friends except for former world heavyweight champion John L. Sullivan on his deathbed. That's pretty crazy too, right? Pretty crazy to think that. So Dixon died broke with no people helping him, no people around. which is not uncommon for some of those great boxers who there at the end are older and not the same amount of people are tuning in and you know, being those fans or fanatics as they were. So that is very much the case right there. And I am working on a Dixon video, as a matter of fact. I'm working on a Dixon video. Of course, you know, I want to do it right. I want to do it right. And it's going to take a little while. I've already started it. I have a portion of it done. The script, that is. Haven't done any work on editing, animation, all of that stuff, but have a portion of the script. And as far as I'm concerned, I have probably about a fifth of the script done, because I think it's going to be one of the longer ones. I want to make it comprehensive, one of the more comprehensive videos on the great little chocolate George Dixon that is out there. And there's not a ton of stuff out there, really, which is pretty crazy. It's a shame that there's not a ton of stuff out there. Some of that could be the fact that he was Canadian, but also I think it's just how sometimes history gets buried in some sense, especially in this fast twitched age of media. But working on a Dixon video, yeah, so I don't know if maybe someone out there beats me to it, but I tell you, this one's going to be comprehensive, and I'm trying to make it the best one to have covered the great legend that is one George Dixon. Poland Ball mentions Corbett like his contemporaries might have been products of their time, like Bob said, but they're also human. Yes, very complex people and can't be labeled easily. Certainly. Yeah, we can put you to this or shove it to the side in some sense, but most certainly for every Corbett during that period, there was another person who was the opposite of Corbett. Think about it. It takes some standing out to make that happen, for sure. Salute to my man Flack Boxing in here. Says salute everyone. Hey, be sure to check out Flack Boxing. Go subscribe on his channel. Got some content there. Continually growing. Good content on the Jack Sharkey. He was a very good boxer. Very good. More athletic than what may meet the eye. More technical than what may meet the eye. And I think Flack does a good job of highlighting that in a video he has on his channel. Yeah, and it's not super long, so you can go in, kind of get that mix or get that feel, and, you know, do your thing. But definitely worth checking out right there. Salute, Flack Boxing, holding it down. Alexander Campbell says Corbett was 6'1", 185, 90s. Yeah, got somewhere in that range. So, yeah, you think about it. It wasn't uncommon, of course, for a heavyweight during that period to be in or around that weight. So Corbett, as I mentioned, more on the slender side, and you can even see that on film. Same with Bob Fitzsimmons. Of course, Bob Fitzsimmons and Corbett's upbringing, or at least dealings there as they were coming up, were very much different. So therefore, Fitzsimmons, he was able to develop a type of punch that is rarely seen in the sport. He's a legendary puncher in the sport, let alone being a legendary fighter and all of that stuff. But there are some legendary fighters who don't have legendary punches, and James or Bob Fitzsimmons, of course, is one of those legendary fighters who was equipped with a legendary punch. He's known as the fighting blacksmith. So you put two and two together, you can kind of understand where that came from. But Corbett himself, yeah, not really much of a puncher. He had some knockouts. I believe it was 5 in those 11, which is not too bad. If you're talking about victories, just shy of 50%. And if you dig through a lot of resumes, you're going to find stuff generally in or below that area or percentile, especially when you had a number of fights. But that being said, Corbett was able to get some knockouts. And at the end of the day, hey, if you can hit and not get hit, certainly the knockout doesn't matter as much. If you can hit and not get hit, then you know what it is. I mean, that's what Floyd Mayweather was able to bank his money on, the advent of hitting and not getting hit. He wasn't the inventor, of course, but that you can go a long way if that is the case, Dan Corbett had a big amateur career too. Yes, yes, we were discussing that there, Dan. It's pretty crazy. Yeah, you look through it, it's insane. That's where he put a lot of his focus, but because of course you could make a lot of money during that time. So not unlike John L. Sullivan, whom he defeated to pick up the World Heavyweight Championship, Corbett too embarked on a number of exhibitions going across country, eventually became a movie star, etc., or at least a star from an early Hollywood perspective. He was in some movies, but he was doing plays and things of that nature beforehand as well. What you would call the modern day, I guess, Broadway star, I guess in these times, would be like a Broadway star, considered something of that tune. But that being said, he took advantage of that. So you could make a lot of money doing that. And therefore, that's partly the reason that his official record is pretty slim in terms of total number of fights and just the overall length of his official career, because he had a lot of outside interests. But if you were the heavyweight champion at that time, then you were one of the most popular men in the sport, or not in the sport, but in the world. Certainly in your country, but in the world. And boxing, that was the sport at the time. So worldwide, there was a lot of interest generated, but no question, even just going across the United States of America, you can make a lot of money. Not unlike today, if done right, I'd imagine. It's a little bit different because a lot of the big fights today happen in Las Vegas. If you think about the U.S., the big fights, the marquee fights, Vegas is a place they go. They still sometimes go to New York as well, the Madison Square Garden. That's a classic historic spot. But just think about if, we had the world heavyweight champion here who was making rounds, having fights in a number of locations, just constantly building up fans, then yeah, that makes a difference right there. So when a fighter is being built up, they usually are fighting in a number of locations because they're being introduced to new fans, and that's what helps to build up that base. And, some have more of a personality than others, and most certainly gentleman Jim Corbett had a personality on him, so that also is something that led to him becoming a more known commodity. And not unlike Floyd, who I mentioned earlier, yeah, there were a number of people who wanted to see him lose. So he was good in that regard. Very good in that regard. Now, we did a video on the channel. It's very interesting, I should say, but there's a video on the channel where we dive into Jim Corbett's career. It was one of the earlier videos that was made on the channel, so it's very skimpy and borderline just not good when I look back on it, but it was funny. I was looking at it a little bit earlier, just kind of trying to recollect on some things, and it's so funny because it's just one of those interesting early videos. You know how it is when you go through that process, you essentially just have to build up towards something, but didn't quite not a standout, certainly. So I say a lot of these guys from during that time, or some of those earlier videos that were made on the channel, they need to be redone because it's in an effort to just kind of boost it up and really put more emphasis on their overall careers, because yeah, we need to dive a little bit more into the particulars. That's what's make the stories interesting and very much unique. And that's something I want to certainly do here as we move forward. But I'm going to pull this up again. And we're talking about James J. Corbett. Be sure to hit the like button, folks. If you haven't subscribed, feel free to do so. But of course, you don't have to. You certainly do not have to, but I appreciate you either way. Let's see here. This is Corbett's resume once again. James J. Jeffries, former world heavyweight champion. So this is one that Alex or Max was just mentioning earlier. It might have been Max. Let me see here. Who was mentioning that one? But either way, James J. Corbett. So that's who. This is someone that, or James J. Jeffries is someone that Corbett fought twice. And that first fight, I believe it went 23 rounds, if I'm not mistaken. I know someone had a question there earlier. I think it went 23 rounds. It was scheduled for 25, and Corbett was knocked out. Now, here's the thing. Corbett was doing a pretty solid job in that contest, in that first fight with Jeffries, and he was actually outboxing Jeffries. He, of course, was the better mover, just thinking about it. Jeffries, he certainly could thrive better on the inside, and that's just in general dealing with any fighter. He was a big, strong guy, but Corbett was outboxing him in that first contest. But excuse me, as I was mentioning a bit earlier, Jim, he was one of those rare type of heavyweights. He just had the ability to battle through attrition, even for his size, and he was a big dude, so he had the advantage on a lot of guys he faced. Certainly Corbett and a number of others, but the thing about it, he was a true athlete, and when it came to those later rounds, he was still the type of guy that could be fresh, and he eventually stopped Corbett in that first contest. I think it was 23rd round. He knocked him out, and that was it there for Corbett in his quest to regain the World Heavyweight Championship, at least from Jim Jeffries. And they would eventually fight again, and that contest went a bit shorter. It was a bit shorter. I had to pull it up, as a matter of fact, but I know that Corbett was stopped. Certainly didn't have as much success in this contest as the previous, but by that same token, as I was mentioning, Corbett was one of those guys who was at one point pretty much a foot in, a foot out, not unlike Jack Dempsey, who at one point had a foot in and a foot out of the sport while he was World Heavyweight Championship. And I don't say that in the sense that those two guys were the only ones and that they were the orchestrators of such. It really wasn't. I mean, it started with John L. Sullivan. He too got to a point where he essentially had a foot in, a foot out. He would do plays, etc., going across country. And then boxing became less more of the absolute focus and just became a part of the overall package. And we saw what happened with John L. Sullivan. Eventually, he wasn't able to sustain such, and therefore Corbett took advantage. Similar case happened to John L. Sullivan, or to James J. Corbett, second ever World Heavyweight Champion. He got to a point where boxing wasn't necessarily that main focal point, but it was just a product of the overall person, the overall brand, and a smaller, heavier punching, certainly. Bob Fitzsimmons was able to dethrone him of the title. And then as far as Fitzsimmons, yeah, you won't see a long and lengthy title claim for him. And yes, he reaped the benefits in some sense of his time as World Heavyweight Champion, but he was dethroned by James J. Jeffries, of course. And both of those guys, Fitzsimmons and Corbett, who I just mentioned, each tried to regain the title from Jeffries, but they were unable to do so. And they had success, both of them, especially the first time around. Both of them in their first fight. I mentioned Corbett, but the same thing with Fitzsimmons. He had success in that first fight with James J. Jeffries, but he eventually, too, was taken out via attrition because there was only so much he could dish out there at the back end. And Jeffries, rather, just a big guy, big, tough, strong guy to be dealing with, especially late in the fight. And Fitzsimmons suffered the same consequences. Unlike Corbett, unlike Sullivan, yeah, Jeffries, he was a favorable champion, but probably not as popular to the masses overall as those that came before him, those three that came before him. And that was largely because of the fact that Jeffries, he was more of a quiet type guy who liked to be more on his own. And we kind of saw that, they had to pull him off of his form to actually fight Jack Johnson. And it was no different as far as when he was World Heavyweight Champion. So, yeah, he was a big name, known commodity, but certainly not as popular as Sullivan, as many weren't as popular as Sullivan. You could argue not as popular as Fitzsimmons and Corbett. but he was still a popular guy to a certain degree, of course. And with that, we know he retired as champion, and then that lineage kept going on. But you would see guys that outside of course, those who held it for a short period. Tommy Burns, he was one who kind of wasn't necessarily like the others in the sense that he became a traveling champion. He would fight. He was one of the first, at least outside of early career Sullivan or early championship reign Sullivan. Thinking about it from when he before Kill Reign, at least before Kill Reign, but more so early 1880s, middle 1880s. Even though he wasn't technically the world heavyweight champion, he had claim to such. He was the American heavyweight champion, and he beat, you could consider him such. He was a fighting guy then, but outside of him, it would be until Tommy Burns where you had a guy who was really fighting at, I guess you could say, more of a rapid pace or a Sullivan type pace at that particular period. But then after Burns, then the same thing happened when Jack Johnson became world champion. He fought at a lesser pace than when he started. And of course, Johnson didn't necessarily seek out the top level names, but really, hey, he was following a pattern that was very much similar to all the champions before him. Heck, after him, same with Jess Willard, same with Jack Dempsey, who we know and love, one of the more popular champions ever, an absolute beast. But when it came to Jack Dempsey, same thing. He even got to a point where he wasn't fighting as much. Then, of course, Gene Tunney, the man that beat him, he even got to a point where, hey, he just said, I'm going to retire. And surely he had more fighting left in the tank, but that was just the thing with him. So it wouldn't be until we got beyond the 20s that we started to see those heavyweight champions who more on a regular were fighting, challenging the best, etc. And it's pretty crazy when you really think about it and boil it down to that, but it's very much the truth right there. So Corbett was one of those guys who reaped the benefits of the championship and decided, hey, you know what? This money out here is too good to just solely focus on boxing. And you know where we are today. I mean, Tyson Fury is about to fight Francis Ngannou. That's for a reason, of course. That's for a reason. As he said, a lot of money going to be involved with it. Salute to EJ Boxing Live. Appreciate you. Appreciate you being here. EJ Boxing Live. Hey, if you don't know EJ, which you probably do, be sure to give him a like and a subscribe because a lot of great content going down over there, holding it down across the pond. Salute to your brother, EJ Boxing Live. He's been doing it a minute. A lot of these individuals that we talk about here on this channel, EJ has been there. He's talked about them, showing the history some love right there. He says Marvin Hart won it before Tommy Burns. Okay, Marvin Hart. Oh, yeah. Jack Root, Marvin Hart. Yeah. So he was one of those that, Hart didn't have it very long. Of course, you're right there. You're right there, EJ. So he didn't have much of a reign to really, write home about from an overall perspective. But certainly he's someone who, I guess in an official standpoint had it. But that being said, Tommy Burns was one who put in a little bit more work there at that time. Salute to you, EJ Boxing Live up in this thing. Big respect right there, EJ. Good stuff, buddy. Appreciate you being here. No doubt about it. But Tommy Burns, a fighting champion, and so much respect to Tiny Tommy, the little giant from Hanover. But Marvin Hart, he was in there with some tough competition. Marvin Hart, that was. So he was a world champion. Didn't get to do a ton as it relates to just his overall reign, but certainly one of those world heavyweight champions that we have to recollect on in history. He was in there with Jack Johnson. We were talking about it on Random's channel there last night. But certainly good stuff in just from an overall perspective. But again, we're talking James J. Corbett. James J. Corbett is just thinking about the history. So let me pull that back up real quick. I was talking about the actual resume there of Corbett. So I was mentioning Jeffries. Sullivan, probably his most famous pre-video fight. You could argue his most famous fight in general, because of the fact that's who he won the world heavyweight title from. I mean, that naturally should be the case. That naturally should be the case. If you win the world heavyweight title, then in all likelihood, that's your most famous fight. But of course, that wasn't filmed. So therefore, his most famous fight is in all likelihood that against Fitzsimmons, because that's what's generally shown. And then when you dig into the history books, film archives, if you're thinking about the history of boxing, it is most certainly that Fitzsimmons fight that is probably going to be the one that sticks out the most in the career of James J. Corbett. But that being said, the most famous pre-film fight, most certainly John L. Sullivan, who was coming in undefeated at the time, had not been defeated in an estimated 500 plus fights. Now, all of these weren't necessarily fights as we think about them today. John L. Sullivan went on a cross-country tour, actually a world tour even at one point. And it was one of those situations where a lot of things happened as far as challenging guys who could come in. Some of these guys weren't necessarily, seasoned prime boxers and all of that stuff. But that being said, they were individuals who at least thought they could fight, and they may have knocked out a fighter or two in their city. And John L. Sullivan went in there. Hey, I give you an open challenge. You can win, I want to say $500 to $1,000, somewhere in there. I think the prices change at varying points, but you can win money if you could stand 4 rounds with John L. Sullivan. Hey, and many weren't able to do it. As a matter of fact, none were able to do it. And it took James J. Corbett to finally defeat him. But as we mentioned, and I think it must be mentioned, that was not the same John L. Sullivan. That was not the same John L. Sullivan. I know it sounds crazy to say such, and some may feel you're kind of disregarding or discrediting a win or a fighter, but if you look at the stories, accounts, what has been documented, it's most certainly you can gain understanding of the fact that when Corbett fought John L. Sullivan there in 1892, it was not the same John L. Sullivan. New Orleans is where it went down. Olympic Sporting Club. It was not the same Sullivan. And that's just kind of the way it is. And, hey, that's not a bad thing necessarily. It's just Sullivan at the time was not the same guy. But, hey, that's not Corbett's fault. He did what he needed to do. And he knocked him out, took him to deep waters, knocked him out. Sullivan, of course, was game there early on. It was pretty cool seeing the fight, and I thought they did a good job. This is going back to the actual Errol Flynn movie, Gentleman Jim, I think is what the movie in itself is actually called. But when you dive back into that, they had that movie in there. I just want to mention that the Errol Flynn movie. It was a good movie. It was a very good movie. People were mentioning it in the comments, and I hadn't seen too many. Well, I've seen a lot of boxing documentaries, the old school documentaries. I watched those, but I hadn't watched the live action films as much in terms of where people are acting out, doing reenactments of some of these fighters. But I really, really enjoyed that film. It's from 1942. It's out there in the interweb, and it's in high definition. So it looks pretty cool. You get past the black and white aspect of it in a world of color, then it's a pretty solid movie right there. And it was pretty cool seeing who they had. And I don't recall the gentleman's name, but they had an actor who played John L. Sullivan, and I thought they did an excellent job as far as the casting was concerned. So I just wanted to point that piece of it out. So that was pretty awesome in some sense there. But yeah, so Corbett, so he fought Sullivan. He fought Peter Jackson as well, who I had previously mentioned, who I had previously jumped on real quick. Let me check on some of these later comments. So appreciate you, Brian. Corbett says, I appreciate how in-depth you guys speak on the history, the forbearance of the sport. Certainly, Brian. Hey, appreciate you, buddy. As always, hey, a lot of great stuff, a lot of great discussions go on here, and it's not just myself there, Brian. As you see, there are others who jump in. They have a lot of good knowledge as well. Puts me on game. Of course, we all can't know every single thing about a fighter, but a combination, or at least through a combination, we can learn a great deal. I will say we can learn a great deal. Alex says modern 15 or 12 round fight would have been a lopsided decision. Never. It wasn't a 12 or 15 round fight, and that one punch never traveled more than a few inches. All right, got you there, Alex. I'm thinking you think. Let me see which one you're talking about. For the first 22 rounds, first Corbett Jeffries. Okay, gotcha. Jeffries never landed a punch on Jim. In fact, he made Jeffries look like a drunken fish out of water. Jeffries only landed one punch. Yeah, I had read that. Yeah, Corbett was making him look silly at times. That being Jeffries, and Jeffries, of course, hey, he had that wherewithal to know that. Hey, it's all a matter of timing, baby. It's all a matter of timing. So yeah, I think he would have lost in a shorter fight for sure. Jeffries would have lost in a shorter fight, but hey, that's the reason it went 25 rounds. Hey, we're gonna play to varying strengths. So the best man is gonna win this contest, certainly. And hey, that worked out for Jeffries, as we know. Joshua Wood says, "Did you see the 60 cartoons? Peabody and Sherman is one show. Peabody was Sullivan's sparring partner doing Sullivan's tour to get to where they wanted to go." You know what? That is so funny. I saw some kind of. I think I know what you're talking about there. Joshua Woods, because I have seen this cartoon of Sullivan versus somebody. It was a little cartoon. I'm pretty sure it's that one, but I don't know if it was that exact, if they have multiple episodes or whatever. I don't know if that's the case, but I felt like they had multiple episodes. But I saw something for sure. There was this cartoon with Sullivan. They had him with a big mustache, and it was like treating it like, hey, his mustache was behind all of his power. So I'm pretty sure it was probably that. I didn't see that. I don't remember it being that particular one, but I can't remember who he was in the contest with, but I thought it was pretty interesting. I saw one on YouTube, so I didn't know the name of the series, but now that, or at least I didn't recall it, but Peabody and Sherman B, I'm going to have to check that out because I'm pretty sure this was tied to that. Or Peabody and Sherman, John L. Sullivan. Hold up, I just want to look that up, folks, real quick. Yeah. This is exactly what I was thinking about. So I've seen one of these little episodes right here. Oh yeah, it was reminding me of the little cartoon, modern day cartoon, that little kid Dexter. I can't remember what the modern day cartoon is called, but similar looking character. Dexter is like a little scientist character. It looks like the same little guy there from that 60s cartoon. Good stuff there, Joshua. So I know exactly what you're talking about, buddy. I know exactly what you're talking about. I'm going to check out more of those. I remember just seeing one, and it's pretty cool. Great grandson of gentleman Jim Corbett. Great grandson. Okay. That's funny. Brian Corbett. Great grandson. That's funny there, Dan. Dan the man. Salute to my mom. Dropped in here. Says, greetings, son. Appreciate your mom. Hey, being the #1 fan out there. We're talking James J. Corbett. Hey, as always, good to have you here, mother. Hey, we're going to learn a little thing. Learn a thing or two, as they say. So, Brian, you have any Corbett artifacts? Hey, Brian, you got any of that Corbett stuff? Good stuff there, though. That's pretty cool. Alex says, I saw an episode of Death Valley Days that had Corbett inventing the left hook as an amateur. Oh, yeah? Yeah, Corbett was a pretty solid amateur guy, or at least that's where he started to get his rise and make his name, or at least in the club. That's what led him to eventually turning pro. He was the heavyweight championship of the athletic club that he was a part of there in San Francisco, and it was highly respected. I was seeing this in another video, and I didn't look it up at this particular juncture, but I believe he was twice the heavyweight championship of the athletic club of reference, but I didn't look it up to fully substantiate such once again, but I'm pretty sure that might have been the case. He twice won the amateur championship there, then ultimately ended up turning pro. So he kind of was working his way, building up to, in a meticulous manner, to that Sullivan fight. So that's something that he made sure he was going to be square on. at that particular time. And I will mention that, speaking of the John L. Sullivan fight, when Corbett and Sullivan actually fought, it's worth mentioning that in Corbett's corner was one Professor Mike Donovan. Professor Mike Donovan. There's a video of him out there on the channel. It's one of the older videos. I want to dive a bit more into him. And I read an article back last year, as a matter of fact, and someone had, I think it was an article from prior to last year, but I just so happened to run across it. I was randomly looking up something on him. And hey, Professor Mike Donovan, if you don't know, he was one of those early scientific boxers, one of those connoisseurs of the sport, taught a lot of guys. Now, there's another Mike Donovan out there as well, this Irish fighter. His name is Mike Donovan. He was actually trained with and was taught some things by Professor Mike Donovan. And he was in the ring with a lot of tough guys during his career. I want to say he was in that middleweight to light heavyweight range there, Mike Donovan. But the extenuating factor, Professor Mike Donovan, and in addition to that, Professor Mike Donovan, he did have a boxing career, though it wasn't very lengthy as far as the number of fights, I would say. So it wasn't, he didn't have a ton of fights in or under the Marquess of Queensberry rules. But that being said, he had built up his name and applied his trade in the world of bare knuckle. So he very much knew how to fight. And then I even have a video on the channel, 86 Boxing channel here, of one where he's boxing. I believe it's in color. He's boxing someone last name Edwards. I can't think of his first name right now. And Professor Mike Donovan is at an older age. As a matter of fact, Poland Ball was mentioning such at some point, talking about the fact that you can see that from a fundamental standpoint, he had some skills, even though he was, I want to say, in his 60s at that particular time, or somewhere around there, but I'm thinking he was in his actual 60s. I believe I may have mentioned it in the description or something, but you can see Professor Mike Donovan was a skilled guy. So that's why when I mentioned earlier in the video that scientific boxing did not start with James J. Corbett, of course, he had to be taught by some individuals and all of that stuff. And I just wanted to throw out that Professor Mike Donovan was in his corner during that Sullivan fight. And I believe Donovan and Sullivan, they may have had a rendezvous of some type from an exhibition standpoint. Don't remember fully. But Professor Mike Donovan also, I know he had been in and done some things with the great Jack Dempsey. The great Jack Dempsey. But yeah, if you just to clarify there, I'm not talking about the Manasseh Mauler. I'm talking about the original Jack Dempsey, nonpareil. So you got to think about the time frames there. We're talking about pre-1900s right here, pre-20th century. Professor Mike Donovan was in there messing around with the great nonpareil Jack Dempsey. If you don't know nonpareil Jack Dempsey, get to know him. Get to know him. One of the greats. Of course, we don't have film, died of tuberculosis at a fairly early age, in his early 30s. And just before we were about to hit that video eclipse and boom, and we were starting to get film on, or boxing on film, man, just around that time, nonpareil Jack Dempsey succumbed to tuberculosis. So we don't have any film of him, but just know, top shelf fighter right there. Top shelf. Dan says, I saw the movie too. When you said you watched it, 86, good history, good movie. Accurate, shows how you had to be cunning, convincing, cunning dude to get ahead in San Francisco. Certainly there, Dan. Certainly, good stuff there, Dan. I know you were on it. There, Dan. Man, it was a good one. So, folks, since we're talking about them, be sure to check that out right there. Be sure to check out that the movie is called, I believe, Gentleman Jim. I believe it's called Gentleman Jim. Made in 1942, or at least released in 1942. And very good film. If you want to know about some of the fights and things that we've been talking about here, you got to see that movie right there, Gentleman Jim. And I think it'll be worthwhile, especially if you're interested in kind of the career and some of the happenings of Corbett. So I recommend it. Salute to Stop Motion MMA. Good stuff there. Appreciate you being here, buddy. Stop Motion MMA, folks. Be sure to check him out. He has some boxing content on this page as well. So salute to you there. Stop Motion MMA. Says first fight you ever watched. I don't know. I don't recall, actually. I don't recall. But what I will tell you is the first fight that made me be like, you know what? I want to dive into this history a bit more. It's no question Jack Dempsey versus Jess Willard, or at least that's the one that I can recollect on the most, because seeing it changed my perspective and view on what fighters back then were able to do, because, man, that was a game changer. That was a game changer. Just seeing what Jack Dempsey did to Willard in that contest, and I've mentioned this on a number of occasions, man, it was just something about it, and it made me say for sure, you know what? I want to know more about these times. Now, I was always into history. I enjoyed it in school and all that stuff. So maybe it just ties to history overall, but I've always been into boxing. So what better than having both at a meeting point, essentially? But no, most certainly Stop Motion MMA, as far as first fight that made me be like, oh yeah, I want to learn about the history of the sport even more. There's no question Dempsey versus Willard. And that's why I like this era. Well, even well before them, of course, but I like this time frame and era surrounding these guys we're talking about here today, and of course Dempsey's era. So it's pretty crazy. Oh, Dan. Oh, first time you saw Gentleman Jim there. Okay, cool. Good stuff, Dan. Good stuff. Good stuff. So Alexander Campbell, Professor Mike's son was Arthur Donovan. Okay, and his grandson was the great Art Donovan, Hall of Fame defensive tackle. Wow, that's pretty crazy right there. I did not know that there, Alexander Campbell. A good little fact to include in an updated video or something. Thanks there, buddy. I told you, folks, you get good nuggets, good gems from everyone who joins in here. That's pretty dope. I know of Art Donovan for sure. I know of Art Donovan, the Baltimore Colts. That's pretty awesome right there. I did not know that there was a connection there, Alex. Good stuff. Salute to you there, Alex. Salute to you there, dropping those gems right there. That's crazy. Small world, I guess you could say. Small world. Small freaking world. Then, yeah, that is quite a legacy for sure. Hall of Fame defensive tackle. Yeah, that's pretty amazing. How about Court beating up those bad, mean Australian boxers, Australian Billy Smith and Martin Buffalo Costello? Hey, yeah, you've mentioned them. I knew of Australian Billy Smith. Don't know really much of anything about Costello there, Dan, but I know you've mentioned Costello on a number of occasions. And, of course, during that period, Australia had a number of top-level boxers across multiple different weight classes, but certainly from a heavyweight perspective, Australia, they were sort of forerunners at one point in the sport of boxing. Certainly a far cry from where they are now, but there were certainly forerunners in the sport of boxing as it relates to the heavyweight division. We don't see as many Australian heavyweights at the main stage, at least as far as any legitimate world title contenders, I guess you can say, or true threats at this particular point in time. But back during this era, they were very much top dogs in the sport. Yeah, I saw, twice Australian Billy Smith there, Dan. I know what you're saying. He did knock him off. Tough guy with a tough resume. That I do know of Australian Billy Smith, not unlike a lot of those guys coming out of Australia during that time. So it's pretty interesting. Salute to you, time for the kickback. Welcome back. Appreciate you coming back there, buddy. Says, could Corbett have beaten Tommy Burns? Most certainly Corbett could have beaten Tommy Burns. Tommy would have been a tough challenge. Just given that, he was always game and all, but certainly James J. Corbett, I think he would have defeated Tommy Burns. And, of course, Tommy, he had a little punch to him, but with the type of game that Corbett fought, I think he'd be able to stay on the outside, and he had the length, height, size overall on Tommy, and I think he would have been able to outbox Tommy. Potentially stopped him, potentially whether or not he stopped him, I don't know, but I think he would have certainly outboxed Tommy Burns there, though Tommy Burns would have certainly given it a try, given it a very good try, surely. But yeah, that's just my opinion on it. There, time for the kickback. Good question there. Yeah, interesting matchup for sure. Interesting matchup. Both former world heavyweight champions at 5'7". Tommy Burns, he certainly, which is not like something he wasn't accustomed to. He certainly be giving up height and reach, and that's what would make it tough. Given that Corbett, he was an economical fighter in some sense, and what I mean by economical is he played his shots right. He wasn't one of those guys that would go out there and really waste shots, and I think that he would be aware of that, and he would know what Tommy's strengths are. Of course, with Tommy, for his size, he did pack a pretty solid punch, and I think Corbett would pretty much try and take it away and be successful in doing so. Be successful. Joshua Wood says, for me, it's Tyson versus Spinks or Holmes. Okay, cool. Good stuff there. Both good fights right there in terms of Iron Mike, one of my favorite fighters. I've said my favorite fighter. Man, yeah, he did those guys in, but I've watched that Tyson Spinks fight, or if you could call it a fight, but the contest in itself a number of times. Salute to Dan, sending his regards to Kickback. Dan says, yeah, I think Corbett easy win over Tommy. Hey, I'm with you there, Dan. Hey, look at there, Dan. Hey, I think we're thinking the same thing. I just think that length and just overall ability for Tommy. But if you came in there to like brawl with Tommy or whatever, thinking like, oh yeah, he's a smaller guy, I'm just gonna go in there and rough him up. Hey, he could do some damage. You saw what he did in one of my favorite knockouts, Bill Squires, who was about the size of or at least had a similar build to Fitzsimmons. But that being said, he went in there thinking he was gonna rough up Tommy Burns and pay the price. Time for the Kickback says, I think the earlier boxer I know is Tom Malamu. Tom Malamu, that's who you're referencing there. Time for the Kickback. Tom Malamu. He was a bare knuckle fighter. Matter of fact, I think he was born in the US and ended up born as a slave and ended up getting his freedom through some contest or whatever for what was considered his master. And he got his freedom, went over, was trained under Bill Richmond. And Bill Richmond had been top class champion, I believe. I want to say champion, but I know he was one of the best before he went over to England. I want to say champion. But that being said, Malamu, he fell at the hands of Tom Cribb, who he fought twice. And Malamu, heck of a fighter right there in those bare knuckle days there. Time for the Kickback. And him and Richmond had a falling out there in the latter end, but I was reading something, or either reading or looking at a video or something on him not too long ago, as a matter of fact. In the last couple of weeks or something of that nature. Alexander Campbell says, first fight I remember was Basilio Saxon 2. I was sick. Oh, good stuff right there. Carmen Basilio, one of my favorite fighters right there, Alex. Carmen Basilio, the Upstate Onion former. Just so happens the International Boxing Hall of Fame is in Kennesaw, New York. And guess what? The Upstate Onion former is from Kennesaw, New York. One of my favorite fighters right there, Carmen Basilio. One of the toughest to have laced him up in the sport. And he was game and wasn't scared to move up and fight anyone, even a fighter who may be considered the greatest of all time. Basilio said, you know what? I'm going to do it. Tough dude right there. So good stuff right there. Johnny Saxon right there, Alex. I know of Johnny Saxon. I've seen a little bit of stuff on him, or I've read some stuff on him. I've seen a little clip of him. I believe that's the case. I've seen a clip. I can't remember who. I don't know if it was Basilio, but I know there's something out there. But yeah, interesting fighter for sure. I need to learn more about Johnny Saxon, though. I will say, but I know of him. Former world welterweight champion, I believe that is Saxon. Joshua Wood says we're only a few handshakes away from George Washington's time, so time is not as long as it seems. Hey, that is true there. That is true, Joshua Woods. And in the case of Sullivan, they say shake the hand of the hand that shook the hand of John L. Sullivan. Remember that saying, right? But you're right. Not too. Speaking of that, we were talking about this on another stream. Martin Van Buren, former president, born in 1790 or something like that. He has a great grandchild alive. That's insane, right? But it's true. He was born in 1790 and he has a great grandchild that is alive. It's crazy. It's crazy out here. Dan says Martin Buffalo Smith, awesome. He beat up Peter Jackson. Oh, yeah. You did mention that. Fought Jackson 3 times, 1-1, 2 draws. Jackson couldn't beat Costello. Okay. Cool. You mentioned that, Dan. Yeah. Jackson, he had to. That's why I say much respect to him. He had to come up tough there in Australia. He bit off more than he could chew there early on, and he took some L's. Bill Farnan was another one who gave it to him. Bill Farnan, not a guy you're going to hear much about these days, but Bill Farnan put in that work for sure. He most certainly did. Time for the kickback. What era do you think Corbett's style would no longer be effective? I would say that his style would be effective in any era. It's just a matter of semantics, you know. It's just a matter of that. What division would he be fighting in? Who would he be going up against? What would be the conditions surrounding such? It's hard when you try and tie fighters to more modern eras, because of course we're taking into account the stuff that we know of, we've seen, we can see here visually in this particular time. And while we have some footage of some of those guys back then and a good deal of it, there's just still so much we don't have and so much we haven't seen, so much we don't know as it relates to their overall styles. And from a visual perspective, that is, we have great accounts of such, but we don't have a lot of the visual aspects of it. So therefore, if you see a guy that is not necessarily to your liking, doesn't necessarily mean they wouldn't be effective. And I try to do this. I try to mention such and use an example of, say, a guy like Deontay Wilder stylistically is probably not going to look too pleasing and appealing regardless of what era he's in. But of course, with him having the ability to punch with that right hand, he could certainly be effective, and therefore it'll be interesting, you know. Then you have to factor in other things like resume and all that. Has he fought a guy with the type of accolades and resume and the type of fighting prowess as some of those guys were fighting back then? He fought Tyson Fury, of course, top shelf heavyweight right now, but a lot of other things you have to take into account. So for Jim Corbett, he fought a lot of top shelf guys, but certainly it's hard to really draw up a 1-for-1. But that being said, from a size perspective, yeah, he would be in for a challenge with a lot of the bigger guys, especially bigger guys who are actually technical and can box, but just a bigger guy who had no skill whatsoever. I don't know. I mean, you would think maybe size comes into play, but you know, it's not apples for apples for sure. Dan says exactly. Joshua is not long after Lincoln Civil War. Yeah, certainly there. Certainly. Time for the kickback says, I think by the 20s it would have evolved too much for fighters from fighters of his era. Hey, interesting. I don't know. It may have. I think it's all relative. Their time for the kickback, but certainly may have been the case. Certainly, it's hard to say with 100% certainty, but I'd imagine, yeah, there are some of those guys. I think you'll have the greats of, the way I always say it, you have greats of multiple eras who would have applied a lot of pressure regardless of what era they were in. So I think Corbett would have been great in any era, as far as if you look at sort of his stature from his era and compare it to the others. I think he would have applied whatever was needed, because he was pretty astute to the game, astute to the scientific, the craft side of boxing. So I have no doubt that were it 2028, he would still put that same type of feel and motion into things. So that's why I think that, yeah, certainly it's not one you can just boil down to a simple thing, or a simple yes or no in most cases, but definitely there are some physical aspects that would be challenges for a lot of boxers, depending on their overall size, relative of whatever era, you know. Joshua Wood says Tunney and Ali improve on it. So I think the few improvements, Corbett could compete if weight was not an issue. Certainly. Basically what I'm trying to get at right there, Joshua Woods. I'm with you. I'm in agreement with you there, Joshua. Yeah, I think those are things you have to factor into it. Dan says Corbett was bigger than they say. Now look at films. He's big. He wasn't as big as some, like a Anthony Joshua, Tyson Fury, Deontay Wilder, height wise and all of that stuff. But that being said, yeah, he was not necessarily just a small guy. He was bigger than Fitzsimmons, who we saw have success at heavyweight. But yeah, so it could vary on any given night. Time for the kickback says your knowledge of the history is incredible. Hey, appreciate the time for the kickback. Hey, just learning, continue to trying to dive into it, learning from others. Hey, everyone on here, good questions, bring out a lot of good stuff for sure. He's Burt Sugar version 2. That's funny. Salute to Burt Sugar, the legend, with some mini one-liners, a lot of good stuff that Burt was throwing out there. So much respect there. Appreciate your time for the kickback. Dan Tunney worked with Corbett. Yep, Corbett, when Corbett was 60, had a hard time sparring him. There's footage. I've seen it many times. Certainly. Yeah, Corbett, hey, he had his particulars, had his style. So I think that, yeah, another thing you factor in, man, it was just tough eras back then. The further you go back, the tougher in the sport of boxing, and that's not taken away from like today or whatever, because of course just the grueling nature of boxing and it being what it was, it's tough in general. It's already a tough sport. But the further you go back, especially when we're talking these times, it was even tougher. And a lot of that was not necessarily just because, or not just simply the boxing in itself, but it was all the conditions surrounding such, which I try to mention and highlight at times. Just tougher conditions. You didn't have as many luxuries as we have today, you know, so of course it's going to be tougher. Technology for them was primitive in some regards as it relates to some of the technologies we have today, especially from electronic digital standpoint. You didn't have film, so that makes it tough. You didn't have film and all of that stuff that you could just go pop in and see like, okay, so this is what this fighter is good at. Not only that, you couldn't just take a flight from DC to LA, you know, and get there that same day. You know, I want to get there a week before a week before the fight, so I can get acclimated to a environment a week or month before a fight. Yeah, for us, if we wanted to get to a place that we were going to fight, if I was going to be fighting in Denver, Mile High Stadium or something, yeah, and I wanted to get there a month beforehand, I could just take a flight the day before that month start. But for those guys back then, they couldn't do that. Got to take a train. You know, if you were going overseas, you had to get on a boat, ship. You know, you weren't gonna get there you weren't gonna get from the U.S. to Australia within a day or two. No, it was gonna take you a long time relative to what we're accustomed to, and not only that, you had to make sure you maintain condition, etc., while you were there. And also, we're going to have to take that same long trip back. So that's what I mean by things like conditions. You know, it just doesn't compare. Those guys had it tougher back then. They were tougher humans back then, just naturally speaking. You know what I'm saying? I'm not trying to sit on a boat for 40 days or anything of that nature, trying to head to a destination. Not that it's necessarily that long, but just think about that. I don't want to take a boat to Australia or New Zealand. I want to visit New Zealand. That's one place I want to go to. But I darn sure ain't taking a boat there or a ship there or a high-speed vessel. I don't care. I need to take a plane, and I need to not be in the air for a super extended period of time. You know what I'm saying? You know, and hey, I accept that. So those guys and gals back then, yeah, just dealing with some tougher conditions there. That's why I say, you know, the eras, we can compare it. It's all relative. But yeah, make no question about it. Those fighters back then were just tougher. And it's not just them. Even if you take a fighter today and you compare them to guys from the time of Ezzard Charles, Rocky Marciano, Archie Moore, etc., etc., same case. They're just tougher. Alex says Goddard in 1890 dropped Jackson twice. Was robbed with the draw. Oh yeah, Goddard, tough fighter right there. Joe Goddard, very tough fighter. He put in a lot of good work. Was in with a lot of good competition. One of those tough guys who doesn't have that huge name today and doesn't have the gold or championship status to back him, but most certainly one of the toughest to have laced him up. And regardless of record, you throw him in there with a heavyweight from any era, this man is going to fight. He's going to win some and he's going to lose some, but he's going to be a fighter, and you will know him as a fighter. So don't let those records fool you, because they're not always created equal. Dan says Corbett died a few years after this liver cancer. Okay. After that little work with Tunney. Yeah, I remember seeing some of that video. He did some stuff with the military as well. That's pretty cool. That's pretty cool that he was able to do that. And yeah, man, just one of those dudes who was able to create a legacy there. Create a legacy. Yeah, good stuff for sure. Hey, have a good one there, Joshua. You might have already dipped out, but salute to you. Appreciate you there, Joshua, as always. Dan says Corbett beat up everyone. Awesome. Even when he lists, he was ahead of his time against the greatest of all time, like Jeffrey Fitzsimmons. He was outclassed him until yep. Certainly, he outclassed him up to that point for sure. He outclassed him. I mean, he was one of those guys. He had an arsenal to him, and he was able to make do with that arsenal as far as the scientific side of the sport and being able to apply his trade in a major way. Of course, we've been going here 2 hours. Gonna have to end this thing, even though we didn't get to dive as deep as we want to. Real quick, we're gonna bring this up again. Jim Corbett, 11-4-3, 2-no contest. Look at that record, but he had a lot of exhibitions and other stuff that tied into it. Show you that record right there. Real quick, I had gone through that. He fought Bob Fitzsimmons twice, of course. Or did he fight him twice, actually? No, I'm thinking about it. No, he fought him once. But that being said, he fought Bob Fitzsimmons, and we know we have that on film. Great fight right there. Great treasure to have. Charlie Mitchell. I did touch on Charlie Mitchell a little bit, but he fought Charlie Mitchell. Guy, there's a video on the channel on Charlie Mitchell. Be sure to check it out. Same with Joe Chewinski. Video on the channel. You'll see his name pop up in a number of videos. Tom Sharkey, Charles Kid McCoy. I mean, these are just greats from their time for sure. Greats from their time. Charles Kid McCoy, former world middleweight champion who moved up in weight. So he's someone you want to check out. And he did his thing. For sure. Very interesting story there with Charles Kid McCoy. Then Tom Sharkey, Dominic McCaffrey, Jake Kilrain. Very, very good fighter. So what I'm going to leave you with real quick, I'm going to present this We're gonna watch this video. Not the greatest of work, but certainly one worth mention. Certainly one worth mentioning here. And that's one on James J. Corbett.
Boxer who was a
I just
significant
want you to check
contributor
this
to the
out.
science aspect of boxing and helped shape the
Yeah,
style of many
it's not the
fighters
best,
today.
but it's pretty solid.
How good was gentleman
in terms
James
of
J.
general
Corbett?
overview.
James John Corbett was born on September 1, 1866, in San Francisco, California. Corbett stood 6 feet 1.5 and had a 73-inch reach. He had an aggregate weight of 183 pounds for his career. Corbett's career spanned from 1886 to 1903. He had 11 wins. This included 4 losses and 3 draws. 5 of his wins were by knockout. He also had 2 no contests. His win percentage was 55, and his knockout percentage was 25. Corbett is credited with being one of the greatest tacticians in boxing history. He was a scientific boxer who brought a technical approach to his offense and defense. He crafted his style in the amateurs, winning championships before joining the professional ranks. He fostered an approach that helped to push boxing more to mainstream audiences. His combination of footwork, feinting, and countering made him a formidable foe for all competition during his time. Corbett's first major fight was on May 30, 1889, when he fought one of boxing's greatest punchers and a fellow rival from San Francisco, the California Terror Joe Koinski. After 4 rounds, the police stepped in and stopped the fight, ending in a no contest. 6 days later, Corbett and Koinski met again on a barge. Koinski purposely didn't bring gloves on board to make the fight a bare-knuckle contest. Corbett refused, and the two fought under the Marquess of Queensberry rules, with Corbett wearing 2-ounce gloves, while Koinski wore a pair of leather driving gloves. The 2 men were bloodied and bruised as they battled back and forth, each having their moments. In the end, Corbett gained a 27th round knockout victory after Koinski tired and was unable to use his power to slow down the elusive Corbett. On February 18, 1890, Corbett took on former bare-knuckle champion, Jake Kilrain. Corbett was able to outbox the Hall of Fame fighter from the outside as he won a clear and uncontested decision. After knocking out Dominic McCaffrey in April of 1890, Corbett faced off against Hall of Famer the Black Prince, Peter Jackson, in a fight to the finish. Corbett viewed this fight as a means to get to a shot at the World Heavyweight Championship that John L. Sullivan held, who refused to defend his title against Jackson, who was black. The 2 men showed their boxing prowess in the fight as they engaged in a technical contest. Both men were great boxers and had moments when they traded hellacious shots that left them bloodied and nearly broken. After 61 rounds, the contest was stopped. This proved to be a significant boost for Corbett, who would get the championship fight he deserved shortly thereafter. On September 7, 1892, Corbett stepped into the ring with the first recognized world heavyweight champion, the Boston strongboy John L. Sullivan. Sullivan was undefeated at the time, but had been out of the ring for nearly 4 years. The fight went down in New Orleans, Louisiana. The sharper Corbett masterfully outboxed Sullivan, using his jab to keep him at bay when he tried to rush, looking for a knockout. Corbett forward, brawling style.
You know what?
Unable to effectively land on the elusive Corbett and not in the best of shape nor fighting form, Sullivan eventually